Randi Green here. Today it is Sunday, July 9th, 2023, and yesterday I uploaded 2 podcasts out in nature, walking and talking about alien technology, as well as having blasted through the last 3 days the playlist on the sciences of the future. What I want to put in here as a little extra and kind of rounding that up for now, because as always when we work with the patterns of change, we dive into the patterns, we explore, we unfold, we unravel, we contemplate, we understand, we work with it energetically, and then hopefully we come to some kind of conclusion and some kind of understanding, okay, this is what it was all about. And today it is the 9th of July, as I said. But it is a 9-16-5 sequence. So that goes in with the finalization of knowledge, breaking down of some old belief systems, as well as, because the number 5 in the top, that's the inner knowledge. So it's a kind of reorientation. Where are we to go now? What are we to do now? And for me, there are so many new things that I have barely begun unraveling since I have been in a catch-up mode for all of the things that we're supposed to have unfolded by now on these timelines, considering that we were deviated collectively in the Western world in 2001 with the 9/11 event that deviated us and put us into some different timelines that have led to everything that's been unfolding around us the last many years. So, of course, there's an agenda behind that, and I don't want to give it more energy than it deserves. So I'll just put it out there and say, this is being corrected. This is what we are being corrected right now. And all of us that have been entangled in the 2001 timeline, deviation has branches from 2007, 2009, 2012, 2015, 2017. And these are some of the branches where we had windows of opportunities to get back on the correct timeline. But were, of course, distracted via deception and delay, as they so nicely put it, the factions that are behind these, what we could call dark light infused timelines. So there's been a purpose of that. So we are now correcting and trying to get back on the original timeline and get caught up with what we were supposed to do if we had been allowed to do what we technically are here to do. Those of us who have come from the future, those of you who are activating from the past, those of you who are getting back on track and connected to your original holographic architecture, and those of you who have finalized your different contracts on the different races that brought you here as part of the cargo ships, as well as those of you who are brought here as part of the enslavement contracts, which, if we are lucky, should begin to unravel, since the scavengers that took over these when some of the top brass of these colonizing factions took off in 2020, should allow many of you to begin to do your actual activation work with whatever's left of our holographic structure. Because it goes without saying that since 2001, the reason why we were pushed in there were to support these dark light projects from where they could get what they needed and not what we needed. So in a way we could say, and I know this sounds harsh, but I'll just say it as it is, in a way we were to a large degree activated within artificial ascension programs where we should never have been part of to begin with. And I think that's a very important thing to cope with and grasp, and then look at the losses and look at the mess, and then cry the tears we need to cry, and then focus on, okay, what do we then need to do once we've done that, dealt with the trauma that has come from it, because many of us have had pretty rough times on these timelines. And not that we're saying, well, now everything's going to get better, because life is not like that. Those of us who are grown-ups and have been in life for a long time, we know that life has its challenges, it has its ups and its downs, and it's a merry-go-round, as I typically say. Some days are very tough and seems hopeless, and we are really in the position where we're not particularly content with our lives. And then we have these little fleeting moments of joy and happiness, and where things look lighter, calm days, as I like to call them, where I can rest and breathe and heal. And that's for me a good day, because most of my days are literally just one step after another to make make it through whatever are there of challenges. And most people have challenges in their everyday lives, which I had when I was younger as well, so I know what that is. Mine has just moved to the inner realms, which does not make it easier considering what's going on our planet. And that's the next step of what needs to be acknowledged, because now we have got to the step. That's the playlist that I have put out there, that with the whole unraveling of ATIP and showing of these different projects that's been going on, finally coming out with To the Stars Academy, which apparently doesn't exist anymore. I have my suspicions. There's nothing real I haven't been able to find out why, but I have my suspicions. I'll just leave it at that. The ones within the communities, they know. It appears that whatever they began with, I put that talk that Harold Pothoff did in 2018, where it talked about the foundation of the To the Stars Academy. In a way, it has already fulfilled most of its purposes. One of them were to make it okay for scientists to come out and say, yes, they are here. Yes, we have investigated exotic material. Yes, we know something's going on. Yes, the crafts are here. And the last lecture I put there from SALT is saying that with 100% certainty, where Gary Nolan, which is part of that group as well, comes out and says 100%, they're here. So now we got that one. So we have got the disclosure. It's not as people anticipated. As I said, I got that years ago. Even if you go back to the Bailey material also states that the ones that will change the world will be the intelligentiaries, I call it, the ones from within science. And it's all about that, because that's where we need build the bridge to these advanced civilizations via science, and not via silence. But sorry about that. Again, remember, this is my second language. So we are building through science, and these are the sciences of the future. And that's why I made that playlist. So if you begin from one and you literally do one after another, you will get the new pattern. It's literally there. That's why I put these specific podcasts or lectures, because there are lectures out there, so you get the pattern. So this is the new. This is what they want to superimpose on the original timeline. And why do they do that? First and foremost, we have the new inner domains, as I talked about with Josh, where I'm talking about the parallel systems from the future that are also here. They are linked up to some of the parallel humanities that have survived all the things that it would have played out on the 2001 timeline, going into the branches of 2005 and 7 and onwards. So these are all the branches that have crumbled and proven that within what we call, I always say the other way around, it's the 0 point field. I always want to call it 0.0, because for me that's more logical, but it's a 0 point where you go into the quantum field, the quantum fluctuation field, where all energies goes from the other dimensions and into our reality, or the other realms. And that's why I also put a little bit of cosmology in there. And some of you will have these are heavy talks and I don't know what they are talking about. But when you listen to it, listen to these people. The reason why I've chosen these people is because they have been involved in many of these projects, which, for instance, Richard Dolan, who's been doing a very good job, he's been talking about that, but he's been talking about that as a researcher, not as one that was in it and had his hands in the projects, in the mud of it. These people, they had their hands in it, and they are now being allowed to talk about it. As Pothoff also says in the beginning of the lecture, I can talk about this now because it's been declassified, so they won't get arrested. Why has it been declassified now? Because this is what needs to happen if we are going to make it. They need to get this out. And as I said years ago, it's always been the plot that you will get the disclosure from the scientists. They will get this material. They'll begin to work with it. The meta materials, of course, they will build the sciences. They will begin to work with anti-gravity as part of the universal structure as it keeps expanding, and now not expanding into a big crunch, but actually going into a straight up line of expansion that goes in a completely different direction into the dark energy and dark matter. And we need to understand what that is. So, of course, all of this is now tied up together. So it's clear that the disclosure and the change that had to happen with the Tic Tac was, of course, to present that it's okay as a scientist to work with this, because that's the whole problem. If you look at John E. Mack and all the other people that have been here, it's kind of been pushed into radicalness. So it's only been the outlandish researchers, the ufologists, right? The one within the UFO agenda. We can laugh about them, whatever. Not that I am, because they've done a very, very good job. But in that also had the lack of the scientific method and a lot of speculation that made it easy to distort it, so that the information were not coming out as it was supposed to, but was being full of deception. I've been under this drill as well, and they're still running these, what we could call psychotronic programs that alters our brainwave patterns to make us perceive specific levels of information they want us to perceive. So it's not that any of these people that have been part of that has been telling something that's not true. Absolutely. Because we know, similar to the Havana syndrome, which they also talk about, the guys from To the Stars Academy, that this is technology. Of course, you can alter the brainwave pattern. So we're here getting that what's been speculated about in the 80s and the 90s and all these kind of things now being tied all up and delivered to us literally from the To the Stars Academy people, which were the whole purpose of it. One was to make it legit and okay, and remove the stigmatization of having had encounters, of having had UFO sightings. So that's now being part of, it's incorporated in American law, it's incorporated into the military, it's incorporated into the scientific community. So that's really a huge, what we could say, that's a huge thing they have achieved there. That's a great endeavor they have completed. So in a way, the To the Stars Academy has already done what they set out to do, and it came because now was time. And what I want to put in here is, for those of you a little bit of following up with the political situation, all of the countries in the Western world are now offloading all of their stash within the military, materials that they have with this. All of it is now being shipped to Ukraine, and I'm probably going to get in trouble saying this out here on YouTube, so that they can begin to create, buy the new types of material as you have within the military. For instance, in Denmark, we have had all of these old F-16s. They are now being shipped off to Ukraine, and now we can, yay, buy the new F-35. What happened? We had F-18, now we have F-35. And all of these will have new technology in them. Similarly, as we have seen with when cars went from what they were when I was a kid into the whole new chip, the age of the chips that are in computers and cars and fridges and what have you, that allows cars to work in a different manner, that makes them very similar to be a type of computer-driven mechanical item. You could already call a car a little bit of a robot if you think about it, how that one is put together. So that's the prelude for the robots. We already have them. We're driving in them every day. They are recording how we do stuff. It's gathering information. It won't be, we have with the self-driving cars that have learned intelligent learning via the different behaviors of the drivers. That is now coded into the future, the cars of the future. That's why they can drive on their own, as we're seeing with the cars and Tesla is providing with. So this is all built in, and it will continue all the way around us. And the same with the new type of military equipment. That was the word, sorry. Military equipment that will come up. They will have, because the other thing that To the Stars Academy, they have had, they got some pieces of exotic material, which they have sold to the military, trying to build, to incorporate, reverse engineer that into a new future type of military equipment. So there you have it. They are, of course, they already have this equipment, but now they have the out. Now they have the explanation why they suddenly can do that. And now it's been out. Yeah, we have had these programs for so and so long. Yeah, we have had these crafts for so and so long. that might not be said, but it will be kind of, they have had these little pieces, and they can say similarly as if you have a bone and you do a DNA extraction, just do a little piece, and then you know how to work with it because of the technologies we have now that makes it possible for us to do so many wonders, right? So this is how it's going to be rolled out. So that will create a kind of a quantum leap, as it's called, from one state into another when we talk about science and technology. And that's what they have. That's what the disclosure is going to be about. That's what this is about, people. It's not about knowing there are UFOs in the sky or what have you, because what is that of interest to us? It's not just, we could say, well, if we go back with some of the ideas that were in with the Bilderberg groups and these kind of things, that's completely off the table. But that little group that wanted to change the world and what have you, creating different kind of scenarios and false flags and all of these kind of things is not the same as that is going to unravel. On the contrary, they put in thought forms, they seeded in different types of information that could create that pattern of change, that could lead to that holographic, energetic joint field where humans would perceive it that way, and by that enforcing that, and by that force it into manifestation. So technically they're running our minds to make us manifest what they want. That was the background of these groups that knew how this works. Collective fields. Carl Gustav Jung talked about the collective conscious and the collective subconscious, of course. So it was already played out in that manner. Point being of this is being changed now because we need to go in a different direction. Since most of these groups, they have fizzled out. Most of them are no longer around. They literally died because of old age. So most of the ones that are part of the older programs that were operating with an idea of a threat, that they were told by some of the species that came here. And yes, from time to time, there are these android beings, semi to fully organic beings here. Most of the time, they're in the fourth dimension. But in the 50s, within specific circles, which I think that Jacques Vallée also talks about, that they come back in clusters within certain time periods, come back and reinforce the pattern that they are building, because they don't need to be here all the time. They got their drones in the sky. They are unmanned. There are nobody there. They are there. Some of these technologies are part of the old colonizing races. Some of it is from the new that have come in, and they are completely in what we could say control of this reality, because it is holographically built. So if you know how to interact with the holographic blueprint, you know how to interact both with human energy systems as well as everything that's behind life and everything that's behind genetics and everything that's behind reality as it is. It kind of goes without saying, so they don't need to be here. But they come in from time to time. And there's always this question, did they have whatever the EBEs and all of these kind of things? And I just found an old interview from George Knapp is probably how he pronounced it, and John Lear, that he had done research for a year. John Lear had done research for a year, and he came out with a lot of interesting information, but it was mostly hearsay from other researchers within the UFO community. And I remember many of these ideas that were floating around in the 80s. But the question is, can we even use these ideas? Because I know in the 80s and the 90s, we did have the Nordics here. They came from time to time. We also had some of the Pleiadians. The last group of that took off in the 90s. So things have changed since that. So we say, well, perhaps they were here in the 80s. Perhaps that did take place in the 80s, even though I strongly question it. Just at least, let me put it this way, some of the material that's out there, I don't really give it much credit due to simple explanations. That also goes with, John Lear actually says in that with George Knapp, and I'm not going to put it there because in a way, I don't feel that the information is legit. But there's interesting, not that John Lear's making anything up, not at all. He's basing on his information on the ideas that they had at the time, and he put it together very coherently and very persuasively, because he used to be a Congress member, so he knew how to put it out there. And that was one of the early versions, similar to Simon Parkes and all the other ones that came out with specific levels of information that involved a lot of species that might or might not have been here, that perhaps were part of the old colonizing races, or perhaps were part of the distortion scheme as professor talked about in the paper on the MJ12, because we don't really know. We don't really know these things. Is it planted there to create thought forms and distortion, or is it legit? Do we have this? Do they have that? Or is that something that's been put in to create a specific type of thought form that will lead to specific kind of conclusions that will lead into rabbit holes? So that's what we need to think about all the time, which is what we kind of call false information, right? It's hybrid wars where we get a lot of information that's not necessarily true. So that's also part of the work that those of us who are doing this must be observant of, which is why I brought Paul H. Smith and his understanding of how to work in a what we call controlled manner with remote viewing, which I feel when I looked at the other remote viewers out there are not doing. There's this whole kind of, yay, we're opening up to a lot of stuff. And I can't stop thinking about, is it 4th of July or whatever movie where people are standing on the roof with a sign, come, please come here. And then you go, completely bombed out, which is probably more accurate than the other, but aside from that's not going to happen. And the reason why I brought this with Gary Nolan as well is because he says the same thing. Of course, the ones that are here are light years, evolutions are ahead of us in terms of technology, and they don't need to be here all the time. That's why I brought it there. He's a little bit self-confident, and that's okay. He's a professor. He's from Stanford. It's okay. You kind of have to have that conviction when you come out. And he knows things. He's been there. He's been investigating things. And he was also the one that worked with Stephen Greer on the Star Child skull and some of the other stuff. So people are coming out now. So this is where we're beginning to have the discussion that takes us to the next level. First and foremost, we kind of know that there's been a lot of disinformation. There's been a lot of information that's been put out there to throw us off the game so we wouldn't get the right answers. And for me, the whole purpose of that was to keep us on the 2001 timeline that were instigated with the event in 2001. So that's the whole plot of that one. So since we're now coming out of that, then we need to reorient ourselves and say, okay, what are we doing now? What's the next step here? Yes, we do have different groups here that definitely do not have the human future at heart. Absolutely, they are very oriented towards their own needs and what they need to do, and very little to do what we are like. If you have a bug in your garden, it will just think this is a nice feeding place. It will not really think about you in the house, actually barely has any awareness of that you are there unless that it confronts you in the living room, and still it will not have the brain capacity to really understand what you are, other than another type of energy that seems hostile or is something that it doesn't really know how to interact with. So let us just stay with that kind of image here and now. So that's also part of the thinking. And we're then going in with the whole, as I began with the false flag, are we going into this kind of alien invasion, which we have been numbed down with in different variations, as a preparation for whatever may come and whatever should come and whatever. And what I have experienced is very little to do with what these movies have been about. So that's what I have from my involuntarily unfortunate and very, very little comfortably nice, happy encounters with these different groups that are coming and sojourning from time to time. Those of us who are operating the artificial force that has the ability to remote view into that, let's call it that. I call it expand my perception field so I can interact with these realities holographically, and by that my brain, since I trained it, will then transfer that into image that will then allow me to communicate and interact with these realities holographically. So that's a different way. We could call it non-local awareness if you like. For me, it doesn't really matter what we call it. The matter of the fact is some of us can do that, and those of us who can do that has been seen as a threat due to what we actually can. One thing is that you remote view it like they did in the SRI project that was under also HAL and that group. That's why I brought it there. They have not been particularly harmed because they were easy to throw off. They were not really in control of that perception. They were just looking at things and making drawings and putting things in clay. And if you're in a seriously advanced civilization, they know about the seers. I can't remember the guy that talked about that in the 80s. He talked about there are different groups within the alien communities. And you have one that's called the seers. You have trade and all sorts of technology, but you also have the seers that are able to look into the other timelines. So this is not something that they're not aware of, but they can scan the ones that were part of that project, say, are they an actual threat? And they can see, no, absolutely not, because they don't know what they're doing, and they're just putting it into clay and making little helpless drawings on a paper. So, and most of them are actually more interested in what we could say military equipment or what's going on the other side of the fence. So they're not a threat to us. Plus, it's very easy for them to throw us off when we remove you into there. They can just go in and target our brainwave patterns into creating something completely else. And that's why I put the Michael Talbot there, because he actually gives the best explanation of how the brain is built up as a hologram, which he put on some ideas from Penrose and Pinbrum, probably the last one, Primhan, I think that's the name. And I read these books in the 80s as well. So that's some of my youth material I was looking into back then. Okay. So that's there, so you get that, because he explains this very, very well. So with that, it's already been made. So we have had people throughout time that have actually worked with these ideas, and the holographic thinking will be important when we begin to bridge into the true understanding of quantum dynamics and the quantum flux fields and the 0-point energy from where these groups are have their sciences. So that's why we are beginning to move out of the Einsteinian, Newtonian kind of sciences and moving into these holographic quantum sciences, which I talked about in 2014, where I began to get the first ideas of how to move out of the geometrically built mathematics. You call it Euclids, I think it's called in English. I know it in Greek, I know it in Danish. I forgot what it's called in English. But there's a specific way of where you build mathematics on these geometrical features, as you're seeing it in the equations. You see it in the Pythagorean. When you have a square, you have these laws, these axioms that goes in and tells you mathematics works this way. You have these angles. This is how it works. A triangle has an 180 degree, and all of these kind of things. You work with that, and these are the mathematical laws as they have been built upon what we could say the old Greek way of working the things, similar as they work within Babylonia and prior to that, because the Greeks were just picking up on what the Babylonians and the Egyptians had already done for thousands of years. That's how they built their structures. So of course they knew of this, but this type of science and mathematics are tied to the frequencies, tied to our physical structures, because we work with very condensed type of matter. So that's how that geometry was built from that understanding, because nature, as we know of it, is built upon all of these different kinds of patterns that are geometrical and can be calculated mathematically, which is also part of the cosmology we have. We are basing it on mathematical principles. So that governs certain laws of how things can move around. And that's part of Einsteinian, Newtonian, and Euclidean, and whatever kind of science that we have had that are based upon mathematics. But once we go into the quantum sciences and added in some holographic principles where the unity contains the system, information system of everything. So let's say, instead of saying holographic, let's call it information systems. And instead of quantum, as we're talking about packages of energy, we're now talking about different states of energy that can unfold into different conditions, all depending on how it's excited, what type of energy that it comes in contact with. That determines its probabilities and possibilities. So that's why when we talk about the uncertainty principle, we're talking about quantum dynamics that are, due to the energy that it comes in contact with, will take different features that we see as probability or as possibilities that are all about the momentum, the cluster, the energy, excitement that comes in. And that's why we begin to talk about vectors. That's why we begin to talk about momentum. That's why we begin to talk about something completely else. And that will be the background. Once you have that one and you start thinking about it within the axioms and the laws of mathematics and begin to work with this uncertainty and really begin to say it's all about what type of energy we're talking about. That's why I brought in some of the ideas both from Jacques Vallée as well as from Harold Pothoff, because Harold Pothoff also comes in. That's the discussion where I have from, I think it's Jesse Mitchells or whatever, where he and a very... I'm going to say nicely, he actually, that little conversation with these three guys, kind of, Pothoff is not allowed to talk what he needs to talk about, because there he lives because he's talking to another physicist, so that by that they can put the discussion very high, and most of you kind of, this is beyond my pay grade. But they are having that discussion where Pothoff actually comes in and say, well, if we take away the consonants, which I claim for years, if we take that away and say, for instance, the speed of light is not fixed, that can also be changed. If we change it into a variable as in kind of changeable feature instead of one constant, it says that's the speed of light, or that's the angular rotation, or that's the spin of that quark, or that's the spin of that boson. And instead going in and say, well, it all depends on what field it comes in contact with. Then we begin to work with field sciences. We begin to work with information systems. That's a holographic feature. If we say holograms are information systems that hold specific type of codes, which Michael Talbot talks about. So then we begin to combine quantum dynamics that are not a matter of specific laws that are limited to Newtonian and Einsteinian sciences and their actions and what they have decided within what we could call the geometrical universal structures, but go beyond that and say everything now goes into the feature that will surface depends on the field that it comes in contact with. It depends on what type of energy it comes in contact with. And that energy amplifies the holographic features that are systems of information. Then you begin to see we will have a completely different type of science. And that's why they got their hands in the exotic material, because once these crafts get shut down, we then begin to understand that these materials are put together. That's the 2018 talk that Pothoff does as well, or perhaps it's Jacques Vallée, I can't remember. You have to look through these things where they go in and look and they say, well, when we got this information, we didn't understand why they had combined this piece of metal in that manner, why the alloy was put together via these two elements. I can't remember, one of them was magnesium, I can't remember the other one. It didn't seem to have any purpose. But later on, as our science grows in awareness, they understood, well, that's very clever, because when you put these two alloys together, or these two chemical compounds together and create this alloy, then you get a specific type of metal that can refract light. And then you begin to understand, okay, this is what these metamaterials are actually about. They begin to work with reality in a different way that is beyond the Einsteinian and Newtonian sciences that are locked in liminal, what we call combinations of mathematical systems that only allow them to work within the framework of these laws that are tied to what we call physical matter. But we're here talking about energies that are working on a subtle layer, as we call other dimensional. And by that, the elements can take other properties, especially if they are tied to a quantum flux field that is not necessarily controlled by the 0.0 field, where everything kind of goes into what we call a steady state or go into a dormant state, but actually learn to go beyond that and say, wow, there's a whole lot of world out there. If we add the quantum potentials on dark matter and dark energy, then we begin to unravel what that actually is. It's just because we have not learned to use the quantum sciences as we are supposed to. So for me, that's the whole reason why this is coming up now. We need these alloys from these crashed crafts, which are nothing but drones. My claim is that these groups of whoever's here, they're only here within different cycles, which is my own personal experience. Most of the time they have cube technology. They have all sorts of distortion programs that runs us holographically, altering a neural network and our brainwave patterns, because it is a hologram. You can tamper with it. You can tamper with the energy system, make people see things. They have test run a lot of different scenarios the last 6 years just think about what has happened and where we are now and how far we have gotten. They know exactly from the physical abductions into the holographic pulse in. They know exactly what we're made of and how we operate and how we are looking at things and how easily we are being distracted and how easily our focus is changed to something else. They just need to create some kind of outer situation that throws of us, and then we'll lose the ability to go inside, and then they can continue doing what they're doing. So they don't see us as a threat. Not anymore, not at all. And they never did. They just saw us as something they needed to understand. And how does this work? Now they know, including with the event program. So these are some of the things where you say, well, are science then in the pockets of these civilizations that are coming our way? I wouldn't put it that way. I would say we're probably all in the pocket of the civilizations and the worlds that are coming our way. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about why do people come back from the future, to alter that, to change that. That's what we're here to do. And that's where each and one of us that are now going into these different processes, whether you are one of the past projects of the colonizing races that are now being set free and by that are activating, or you are part of the different programs that are under these civilizations that are coming in, or you're from the future to try and avoid all of that mess that will come from that, or whatever, you're coming from some of the timelines that will connect to the 2001 timeline but no longer exist, and now you're left drifting around because your project and your mission statement is now being erased because the timelines are erased, because these are interconnected. When you really begin to understand the systems and energy and how reality works, then you also understand that the mission statement is incorporated into your holographic architecture, and by that you are depending on the timelines or the code sequences of the holographic network, which is behind all realities, that you have reconnected to, creating an anchor point in your traveling on the different nodal points in the holographic network. So that if that disappears, well, then our mission statement disappears, and then we have to reorient ourselves and say, what am I doing here? So that's also where, a little bit where I am now. That's why I just blasted through all of these different things to get caught up with everything I've been delayed for the last 10 years, literally, considering where as everything. And yes, perhaps it is a little bit this kind of catch-up modality. And yes, there's a little bit of regret. And yes, there is a little bit of remorse. And yes, there's a little bit of sadness. But either way, it is what it is. And this is when, if we really conceptualize the idea that perhaps the whole activation since 2001 were actually on the wrong timeline. It was on the wrong code stream. It was a wrong holographic energy. It was a wrong system of information. And that has been imbued into our energy system. Then the challenge is now, what do we do with that? How do we correct ourselves? How do we get up to speed? How do we work with what we actually need to work with now? Knowing that now we have got the officials, it is now part of the collective field of humanity. It's becoming mainstream that they are here. Yes, they have been here for a long time. Yes, we need to figure out why they're here. What's that about? And we have the science community that's working with it. Although that these scientists that are doing that, they have been pulled in a long time ago, been remodified. Their holographic architecture is now ready to work with these sciences. That's why they're moving so quickly, because we have all been changed. I'm being changed constantly via these genetic modification. And no, it's not fun, and no, do not wish it. It's a piece of shitty life to be part of these programs from A to Z. Absolutely painful, horrible, disastrous, nothing pretty, nice, or anything about it. And it's a challenge every single day that I am living with this. But where I kind of come with it is that at least I can give you this information. And it's not that I ask any of you to follow up on it, because you are where you are, you do what you do, and I can't expect anything, and I don't expect anything, because you just get frustrated if you expect anything. But at least I can say now that on this level of information I was not able to give when I began getting the information. So a lot has changed. But it also means, as those of you who are listening to me, you also know I always tell you, you need to move faster. You just need to learn to work in a pace that literally just jumps timelines when we have these windows of opportunity where we can upgrade and align ourselves with the original timelines that are behind where we should be now, the fifth cycle. We need to understand this is deception, this is delay, and then figure out how to jump the timelines and learn to do it as quickly as possible. Literally have a situation in your life where you can do this. Look at the world, what's going on out there. How can you arrange yourself? I talk a little bit about that in some of both the progression sciences, as well as in the change maker material, as well as some of the updates and whatever I'm coming out with there. I'm always saying the same thing. That's also why I don't need to keep saying this. And now I'm caught up with the latest of the sciences I should have been given 10 years ago. Anyways, it is what it is. There's nothing to do about it. We can cry over spilled milk, but it's still spilled. And we just need to take it off the floor and then figure out, okay, what do we then do? And that's some of the change maker material. I talk about how we work with these strategies of how to adapt to a world that is in constant change. So with that little update given here, that's my whole, if you ask me first and foremost, why didn't the old type of disclosure come to be from politicians or what have you? Because they didn't know, they were not read in. John Lear talks about, which he got from his research probably, that yes, we have people within politics that knew this kind of stuff. My angle has always been no. No, nobody's been read into this. Why haven't they been read into this? Because that's been in the black projects, which is also what Pothoff talks about, which they talk about that, this is, and Richard Dolan, whoever, of course, they are not reading it in. And Stephen Greer has also got a lot of material out there where he's coming in, actually trying to brief people within the political system about this. And they're like big question marks, looking wild and confused, and why have I not heard about this? So of course not. Of course not. So that's the whole, if you ask me, what would be, if there was such a thing as MJ12? I think there was, I know there was, but most of them are no longer there. So we're just hearsay and whatever they had of information. Remember, I referred to the interview of Richard Dolan and Ron James. They also talk about most of these guys are now dead, and they took that information with them to the grave because they did not put it down in paper. And that's when I looked at that interview with John Lear yesterday. He was pulling out, well, I got this paper and this documentation, and this was something that was given to me. I got all of these documents. Yeah, do you know it's legit, or do you know this is another attempt to try and seed disinformation so that you come out with all of these statements that are then keeping people in the loop of the rabbit hole for decades, speculating? The more you kind of have something that leads to dead ends, the more you can be sure this is false information. So this is where you can do that distinction between what type of information are we dealing with here. Is it something where you can say this has weight, and it has weight because this is also what, when we do the scientific method, you have to kind of have some evidence somehow. If you don't have it, at least you have eyewitnesses, you have multiple eyewitnesses, or you have people that actually experienced it, been part of it, and come out and tell what they have experienced. First-hand sources. Then we can begin talking about that's evidence. And that's why I picked these people in the future sciences, because what they're also saying, aside from the disclosure that is now building the foundation of the sciences of the future, is that they are also coming in with the new ideas. They're seeding it in. They are doing the last piece of that puzzle that will lead to the next generation of young people to work differently with the David Price and his cosmology, what's eating the universe. He also says, this is for the next generation. Your work is to figure out dark matter and dark energy. Get to work, people. And Pothoff's come out with these kind of things. He actually said in that interview, which I can't remember what it's called, between these three guys, where he actually comes out and say, and people might not hear it because they are talking a very high level quantum discussion with a lot of acronyms and a lot of shortening down of things that people might not be up to speed with. But he actually says there that this is about making things viable and flexible, and by that we begin to work differently with reality as we understand it. So he seeded that in. That's been his job, aside from whatever he's been doing now as he's getting into old age and are letting go of the reins, so to speak, and have got himself out of the projects, doing that last service for humanity, coming out and say, now I can say it because it's been declassified. Let's get things on the table so we know what we're dealing with. So that's what the other groups of the older projects should have done, but they didn't. And some of the information I got on that one was actually from the ones that had not crossed over yet, that were lingering around waiting for someone to get ready to hear that. Anyway, so that could, of course, also be a holographic insert. So when we begin to work with this understanding of, we need to look into, okay, we have now got that on the table. So that's no longer what we need to look into. We no longer need to prove that. It's there. It's been worded by scientists, by the ones that were in top brass part of these projects. It's out there. We know esoteric or exotic material. Sorry about that. Exotic material. We know crafts have been come down from the sky. We know they work with this. We know they're reverse engineered. We know it's part of the new technology. We know science is working with it now. So we don't have any discussion there. Okay, what do we then do now? What's the next step for those of us who have been sitting there in the chairs in between because we had a little bit of doubt since nobody's talking about it? Well, perhaps it's just our own fantasy. Okay, people, not your fantasy. What do we do about it now? What is it that we need? What's the next step of our understanding of what's going on here? And that's where the whole academy has come, and that's why what I have tried to tailor is this critical investigation of what's going on within parapsychology, understanding these type of technologies that's been running us. So many people have talked about it, but since we didn't have anything that were literally telling us this is existing, we had the showing of the Havana syndrome. That's the technology. How they can alter and change us and physically and mentally affect us. How these, and I think it's important when we talk about the material from the ATIC group, is also that we begin to look into this whole understanding. Because if we look at Stephen Greer, he goes from, as I talked about in the podcast yesterday, he talks about how we have encounters of fourth kind and fifth kind is where we call them in. And I'm sorry, I'm just always baffled about who in the heavens names would ever do such a thing without knowing what we're actually calling it. It reminds me of the people on the roof of the movie The 4th of July. Come in, aliens. Yeah. No, thank you. We do not give them allowances to come in as long as we don't know what we're dealing with. It's like having a house and you open up all the doors and you're living in the neighborhood where the mafia is just down the corner and you have got some really gang groups on the other side of the corner, whatever, and you leave your house unlocked. Of course, we are not being immature in this. We need to be logically, reasonably aware that there might be a potential threat. Not to create a hysteria of there is a threat, but these are what John Lear also says, 90%, and I would agree on that number, are not benevolent. We are living in a very hostile quadrant. Why? Just look at, and I think that's Gary Nolan also says that, look at the way that they treat humanity. Look at the way that's been going on here. Look at the way that perhaps they're not observant of, but at least it's not part of the way that they receive reality, perceive reality. Because they're working with encounters of 4th or 5th degree, where 5th degree is where you die. So that's where you come in contact with this technology. And that's where I went back with the EBs and John Lear, because he talks about how some of these are absorbing things through their skin and they're excreting some kind of material from their skin. And Gary Nolan also talks about how if you come in contact with that, then some of the ones that did that, they died from it. And that, I would say, yes, that's the information I got as well. And that's why when we have these images around, floating around, where people are touching with their bare hands, no, of course not, because they're put together in a different way. They hold toxins that are toxic to us. Literally, and that's one of the reasons why they use androids. Not because they were afraid of getting whatever, because they can do whatever they want with energy. No, because they needed to preserve this organic form while they were doing the genetic modification from where they could get the genetics. They needed to continue their civilization. So they needed their specimen to be in a pristine state. It's a whole other level of thinking that we need to go into, also when we talk about some of these projects. And the ghost I talked to, the colonel I talked to, which was a ghost, he showed me how some of the people that come in contact with some of the first craft and some of the first bodies that were left there actually during the Second World War, they literally began to undergo genetic modification that led to all sorts of weird diseases. And we have some of the ones that have been part of these projects working with, if they did get their hands on one of the original ones that comes in every third year or what have you, well, then it does have detrimental, very harmful effects on our physical form, because our genetics and their genetics are not compatible. Hence the hybrid projects, where they're using all sorts of different types of intermediary DNA code sequences to be able to link their DNA to our DNA. And part of that is to administer the thought forms that are connected to our mind field, that is connected to the central nervous system, that is connected to the DNA that runs on the electric frequencies, connected to the magnetic field, hence the crisscrossing on the sky. And once we begin to know these systems of information, then we begin to understand how things work. And then these things become much clearer and much more logical. So with that little piece here that again bridges into me having kind of, this is kind of all that I can say on this for the moment. We need more people that get up to speed with the higher levels of science, that gets up to the higher order understanding of science, that begins to work with quantum and holographic systems of information, put that together, work with that both within science, but we also need people that are much more aware of the holographic architecture, working with it in the manner that it's supposed to, and not under all of these false programs of the 2001 timelines that keeps people within the geometrical pattern, crystallized organic structure. And I cannot say that more clear than that without getting myself into trouble. You need to really begin to understand how things are progressive, dynamic, changeable, permeable, always in a process of change, all depending on what type of field we come in contact with, and learn to work with systems of information as code sequences that align with your holographic system, that aligns with the reality field you're part of, that aligns with the type of consciousness you can develop, that aligns with the type of organic form you can develop. That's the science we need to get into, and I need more people to be on that level before I can go to the next level and give you the next level of information, because otherwise it's just a waste of my breath. But I've given it here, so now you kind of have a pointer of where you could focus some of your ideas. Again, this is me doing a little bit of talking about what I have done, but the whole academy, I built it to give you that knowledge that will take you to that level, all depending on how much effort you put into it, how much clearing work you're doing, how much meditation you are doing, how much inner work you're doing, how much you choose that this is the reality you want to be part of, how much you commit to this. To use John Lear, that took 1 year, and technically he knew just as much as I heard other UFO researchers know after 20 years. So he was really just blasting through, probably with a purpose. He is no longer here. But that is, I think it's Channel 8, Las Vegas, John Lear, 1987. If you tap that in on YouTube, John Lear, 1987, interview with George Knapp. And it's spelled Knapp, then you probably get that one. But I will not put it out there. I will not promote it because I see most of it to be distortion. But he gives a good summation of how the UFO researchers looked at things in the 80s. So look at it from that angle. Oh, this is what they understood. This is what led to the deception. This is what led to the implementation and the possibility of the 2001 timeline. So this is why we begin to work with systems as information, as patterns of change that actually affects reality via the quantum dynamics, and in that way allows for different timelines to surface, and from different technologies to be implemented, and from different genetic modification programs to be implemented into our reality field. It's a completely different way of learning to work with energy and consciousness and how we perceive reality. So that's part of the new sciences as well. Once we get that, and that's why I put in the lecture of the female journalist, which I still can't remember her name. It's not to be rude. It's just there's a reason why I remember some people's names and other people's names I don't. There's a reason for that. See it as a protection for her. So, but she comes in and talk about how she has been in these sciences and this kind of mediumship and how they can alter what we perceive to be the tangible reality, because it's not. And that's why the sciences that are built upon these fixed structures of geometry are foundationally a limitation to our understanding of what the reality really is. And that's why we need to go beyond and learn to work with the different holographic quantum quantum sciences that puts us in a completely different direction. And once we begin to understand that and begin to understand the holographic properties behind a physical form, then we begin to understand, perhaps it's not that physical. It's just because the reality as we know of it is in a fixed state of a specific type of energy configuration. But if that changes because of the pillars that are originally held up, that the plasma crystal pillars that originally held that kind of construction are now no longer in play, and we're having different types of coming in that are now being run by alien technology and artificial dimensions that are being locked into our reality field to keep it stable, then we really begin to understand, okay, we as a humanity plays a huge role in stabilizing our world. Not just physically by our actions and what we're doing, what we're using, and what we're consuming within all sorts of gadgets and stuff and things, but emotionally because we affect the human resonance, and mentally because we are affecting the ionosphere. And the more the original dynamics of the holographic quantum realities come our way, the more we will discover that we are the field that affects the major field we are part of. We are interconnected. We're all part of that world we are existing in. We are not just on it. We are made of it. We are part of it. We are affecting it by our very existence, by the way we feel, and by the way we think. First, most important step of the rules of engagement with all living systems. We are affecting the world we live in by who we are. So that's the only thing I can urge all of you to do, working from that parapsychology level of things. Do what you need to do, grow in all of your potentials, and then bridge into the sciences. Then we have the full package of where and what we should be in the futures to come. So with that one said, thank you for listening in, and I hope this will be useful somehow. If not now, then later. And until next time, take care.